just some slides?
Yes, and I just remembered to
Okay.
record. So
Awesome.
let me
Awesome. And
give
actually,
you.
I know a couple of you said you had to jump off early. So if you already like had in your mind some questions you wanted to ask, please leave them in, because at the end, I'm going to answer some questions. So yeah, just so you have that, you can watch it in the recording. Okay, so let's get started. Can you guys see my slides?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Okay, so today is just about 3 ways podcasting can help your business. What we're going to focus on, I'm just going to go into a little brief history of basically where podcasting, like how it happened, where we are today. We're going to talk about guesting on podcasts, and then 3, just how podcasting, if you want to start a podcast, how it really can be able to help make more meaningful conversations between you and your audience, and then ultimately sell your books or offers. So I don't know if anybody knows the statistics or how podcasts got started, but they actually did start in 2004, which in our day and age now, I feel like seems a very long time ago, but actually isn't when you think about media in general. But it really skyrocketed in 2014 with narrative podcasting. If anybody listens to true crimes, that's kind of when they really took up and got steam and have just grown since then. And then, like a lot of you know, there's a ton of people who started podcasting during the pandemic. Just because I'm a big numbers geek and it helps me put in perspective kind of where we're at with it. Is before the pandemic, there was about 1.5 million podcasts. And now like when I looked yesterday when I was creating these, there's over 4 million podcasts. Now I know that may seem like a lot, but put it in context, because most people listen to their podcasts on their smartphone, there's 6 billion smartphone holders in the world. So that 4 million podcasts is very, very small. And so I'm going to address it a little bit later on, but people think that the podcasting universe is saturated. It is not. So that's a little bit there. And then because again, I'm into numbers and like to share these kind of things with people if they're on the fence or just even seeing like the power that podcasting can have on your business. So their market share of podcasting in 2023, and I know not all of us, like and even most of the clients I work with, are not even really looking to have ads or grow that big, but I think it's really cool, and it just shows you the power of how big this industry is getting. So there's 4 billion in direct sales and investment projected to have in 2023. So that means companies are using podcasters to advertise their products. So to me, that's really cool. And then I don't know if anybody has heard this or knows this, but podcast listeners are some of the most loyal listeners out of any media that you can find, even on television, which is crazy to me because so many of us are like addicted to Netflix and all that. But 80% of podcast listeners listen 8 hours a week to podcasts. And I know I'm one included. Like I probably listen more just because that's what I do for a living. But to me, that's a lot to be in somebody's ear. Like even if you were that person that only talked 30 minutes, you most likely they're going to listen to you every week. So that just keeps creating that more loyal base to your clients. And then 69% of listeners said they bought something from a podcast ad. Again, we might not want to have advertising on our podcast if that's something you're thinking of doing, but I just think the trust again is really there with people's audience when they have you in their ear. And then one other thing, and it may or may not be of interest to this group, but I am a big YouTube watcher, and YouTube announced about a month ago that they're really embracing podcasts and allowing it to be on the channels for creators to use. So I think that's a cool thing to keep in mind. Okay, so I know a lot of you mentioned that you either have guested or are interested in guesting. I'm just going to give you a couple tips here on how to properly guest, and just where I see kind of some people go wrong with this or not using it to the fullest capacity. So obviously you could hire somebody to do this, but let's be real, it's a lot of money. So this is something you're going to have to mentally invest a couple hours a month in to try to find the podcast you want to guest on. So I would just say the first thing you need to do is narrow down the categories. All of you guys have wonderful, like your niches. So that's like an easy way to think of parallel even niches to you, to where that audience on that podcast might be interested in hearing what you have to say. And then another thing is sometimes people are like, I want to be on this big show. Like, do not underestimate the small shows, because they could still have 200 to 1,000 listeners, and think about that kind of impact that you still could have with just that small listenership. It's more if they're, which is my next point here, regularly posting. So there are websites you can go to kind of see data on the podcast, but you can even just go to Apple or Spotify or wherever you listen to your podcast and see how often they're posting. If they haven't posted, obviously, in like 6 months or 3 months, I would not guess on those shows, because it's just not going to make as big of an impact versus if somebody's regularly posting. Okay, and then the next thing here is pitching yourself. And you may have to turn it, well, I should let me back up here. You want to make sure you listen to the episodes for 2 reasons before you pitch yourself. First, just to make sure you align with that show. And second, you can really speak to that host, and you can show, like, I've actually invested some time in finding out about you and why I'd be good on your show. So just that's a caveat there. And then the second thing is just, you might have to suggest what you're going to go on there to talk about. And so that's why it's really imperative that you know about the podcast before you start pitching it. And then this is just more after you're on, well, not after you're on, but when you're done with your interview, make sure, because I've listened to podcasts where I find it very hard to get in touch with the guest, or the guest doesn't, or the host doesn't leave the website for whatever reason in the show notes. So like, make sure you kind of slow down and clearly state your website or your email, because people might be driving, or they might, it needs to just stick in there, or they like, it's just, if it's glossed over too quickly, like, people might not go back and find it. Okay, and then kind of one other thing to mention here is that a lot of when you guest, many times the hosts will create assets for you. So you could share on your website, share on your social media platform, share on LinkedIn. And this is kind of the thing I see, even, and this goes even to when people have their own show, is they're not posting about it enough. They're not bringing attention that they were on the show to go and listen to it. So that is, to me, is like the biggest downfall I see after the show is produced and out there. Okay, the next kind of thing, this is, some of you may or may not know, but there are services to match you with podcasts. Some of them are free, some of them are paid. I know Podmatch, you can start with a free and then upgrade to pay. So it just, I've heard mixed results. So it probably, what you're putting in there really like narrowing down what you're looking for really helps us to be successful. And I'm sorry if I talk fast. So, so don't forget about your own network. There may be a ton of people in your network that either know somebody or have their own podcast that you may have forgotten about. Like, just put it out there. Don't be shy about it. And then kind of going with that is, if you're in networking groups, or you're in, like Amy mentioned, the small business group that we're in, there's so many times I hear people and they're saying, like, put me in touch with somebody who has a podcast. So being open and just saying that that's what you're looking for. And then you may be wondering, where can I find these shows? Google, Dr. Google, whatever we want to call it, is the best place to look. You can literally Google in, let's just say I want to find health and nutrition, give me health and nutrition podcasts. And there should be like a bunch that come up that you can just start doing some research on. And then I guess my challenge to you is, if you really want to take this seriously, start with 20. I know it seems a lot, but you could spread that out over a couple of months. Start with 20 that you want to find and pitch to. So that's my thoughts on podcast guesting. Do we have anything that was, okay, just want to make sure that there was nothing immediate I needed to answer. Okay, so now we're going to go into more, if you're thinking about starting your own podcast, some questions that you may already have or have thought about prior to doing this. So I had mentioned earlier that many times people start a podcast and think it is just enough to have it on Apple and Spotify. And unfortunately, as was it Sarah Sarah has a podcast. Like Sarah mentioned, there's tons of podcasts out there. So how are people going to find you? If you're not bringing it to people's attention somewhere, like the likelihood of people finding it is very low. So going into starting your podcast, you have to have a strategy of how you're going to talk about it, how you're going to get people to listen to it, and just generally get the ears on it. The next thing is kind of just even in the same vein of guesting. You need to know who you're going after, who's your target audience, and really know them inside and out and what they're looking for you to talk about. So that's that. Now, some people think, and this might hurt people or bother people, but you can't talk about anything. I'm sorry. It's going to be very hard then to keep your audience's attention. And not to say you can't have like subcategories of topics, but you can't one day be like, I'm a health and nutrition person, and then next one I'm like a motorcycle rider, and that's what my podcast is about. So you could have all those interests, but you really need to try to narrow it down so the audience does not become confused about what you are talking about. Another kind of fallacy is that you need to have a huge following before starting a podcast. That is not true. I've seen many people grow, just they never had any social media or anything, and they grew pretty well through podcasting. So, and it's all because it comes back to the strategy. This is going to answer Amy's question, or hopefully help answer how much time will it take. So it's really going to depend on how many episodes you want to do per month. So I always suggest 4, but I also am a big proponent of people doing what's manageable for their schedule. I think the biggest thing to remember here is that you just want to be consistent. So like if the audience knows like I'm only posting once a month or I'm posting every other week, they know that those episodes are going to be coming out. And so they're not like looking for them and then you don't show up and then they fall off. So I think that's the biggest thing. I think, again, how much time will it take? It varies, but I would just say as an example for me, when I'm doing full service podcast management for clients, it takes me about 4 hours a week for that show. But that is not including me recording, because obviously the client's recording the show. So that's like another couple of hours. So I don't want to say this to scare anybody out of doing it, but I also want it to be realistic and understand what you'd be getting into by doing it so that it's successful. And maybe you have to let another marketing thing or give up something else in your business to do this because it's really what you believe will help you grow, or something you've just really been interested in doing for a long time. And then next question I always get is, will I make money doing this? So yes and no. I say that you make money through selling your offers and not through ads, because a lot of times we listen to these big podcasters who have ads. Like that is not the way that I propose people make money. I propose people make money through selling on their podcast. So it's, I guess, yes, you will make money, but it just depends on your aim. And maybe sometimes you're not even interested in making money. You're just interested in making an impact on your audience too, or educating them in something. Okay, so I want to share just a little story. And I feel like the audience here will really understand, which I'm excited about because I'm a Gen Xer. And so for me, thinking about podcasting, I'm actually going to start a podcast eventually, hopefully by the end of the year. But I just get very excited for clients who even do this, because growing up, like there was no way for anybody to just talk about their story. Like we saw celebrities or the newscasters, and you would think in your mind, like they either knew somebody in the industry, they came from the elite crowd, or they maybe they really truly worked their way up to get there, but it was very, very hard. With podcasting, it's such a low barrier to entry. Anybody really can do it if they have the will and the great idea to start it. So that's personally why I love it. And I just love that so many of us are getting involved in sharing our message. And it's so funny because there's literally, if you Google or look for random categories, like there's podcasts for everything. And this is just a really funny one that I came across. There's these 2 American guys that live in Germany. And so their whole thing is 2 Americans in Germany drinking whiskey. Like it's just such a random thing, but they have a huge amount of people listening to that podcast. So it just shows you that almost anything can really be translated into the podcasting world. Now I know some people mention they're fine with video and they're great. And I know people are like, video is king, like you need to do video, but podcasting was originally not for video. It was purely audio. So for all our introverts, people who don't want to be on video, podcasting is great for you because it's probably where you're going to be most comfortable and probably really yourself because you don't have to worry about being on camera. So there's that point. And then it allows for a ton of repurposing. So if you have a 30-minute or an hour show, think of all the clips that can be taken out or the quotes that can be taken out of that for if you have a blog or if you do social media like LinkedIn, Instagram, or if you're on TikTok, you can repurpose it and then drive even more people to your website. And then kind of going with that, podcasts really translate really well for blogs. I see a ton of people with a lot of success doing that. It is a little layer of work to add to that, but they translate really well. This is a really cool one. So people are surprised that, let's just say Amy and I meet somewhere and I'm like, hey, Amy, can I come to your show, like to talk to your group? She might be like, I don't know. But if I tell her like, I have a podcast, can you come and interview on it? She's probably like, yes, I will do that. Because there's just this thing that gives you this clout when you say you have a podcast and you could literally have 10 people on it, 10 subscribers, but it kind of gives you this, like you have something bigger going on than maybe you even do. And more people are likely to say yes if you're doing an interview style show than if you're just asking them to come speak at their event. For people who like to talk a lot or want to go deeper on subjects, podcasting is a great avenue for this because you can delve deeper into things. You can talk more. We're like, on social media, we have these like little clips where you're like, wait, I want to say more, but it's just not the avenue for that, where podcasting can really allow you to do that. Something happened to my picture there. Okay, so kind of went into all of this already, but I'm transitioning more, and this may be why you're here or what you wanted to know is about selling your books or selling your coaching services on your podcast. So as I had mentioned earlier, you really create a higher level of like, no trust through podcasting. As I mentioned earlier, people that listen to podcasts are way more loyal to that podcast than they are any other medium. So I want to caveat this because sometimes people feel really uncomfortable with selling, period. And I would like to just, the salesperson in me who used to do sales, I just want to like challenge you all to think that sales is not being pushy, it's helping your audience. So if you kind of take that point of view from it, you'll feel a lot less uncomfortable selling your offer. And quite honestly, like people are just, most of the listeners that are going to know you and trust you, they're going to not be bothered by you selling on there. Now, if you do it every 5 minutes, yeah, that's not very appealing. But if you're just doing it as an end, and I always like to use the term like soft sales, like you're softly telling about your offer, you're priming them even for your book that's coming out, like they're not going to be upset. Like I don't get upset when I hear people sell their stuff on podcasts. And if I am, I just rewind, like I just fast forward. So it's just something I challenge people because I have a lot of clients who, because they have a great heart, they don't want to seem pushy, but they have amazing offers. And I'm like, this is why you started your podcast. I mean, you are, you're doing this to share info, but you also aren't doing this as a nonprofit, which is fine. But to me, that's not necessarily the avenue that everybody's going down. So I like really encourage people to think of that a little bit in a different way. And then for those who are adamant of not selling or they don't even have anything to sell, it's just such a super great way to educate your audience about whatever topics, that you might be talking about, because it's just, again, it's a longer form. You can talk a lot longer. And then I'll go back to what I said at the beginning. You guys are all authors, so you're great at storytelling. And that's like the key. That's the differentiator I see between people who are successful and people who are not. They're not maybe great at storytelling or explaining things in a deeper way. Okay, so we went through that. And then just some tips here on if you are going to, and this may be a little more advanced because I know there's only one of you that has a podcast, but you want to make sure that if you are selling something that your order for you is very easy to fulfill, meaning that you've got the back end of everything set up. There's no like broken links, and it's just super easy for the client to purchase through those links that you're going to put into the show notes. And I was going to say one other thing about that. I think I already mentioned that. Yeah, it's just generally you want to make it easy. And then, oh, I know what it was, is like you don't want to just sell to them and then drop off. Like they never hear from you again. So make sure you have some. So again, this might be a little build up to setting up some systems, but that you have them on your email list and that you're still nurturing them and staying in contact with them. Okay, so just to kind of wrap it up with a bow with a quote, so people are really listening and want to consume all the content that is there and available. There's a level of dedication that comes from podcast listeners that you don't otherwise find. And now the numbers prove it. Podcasts aren't a bubble, they're a boom, and that boom is only getting louder. So I kind of went at a fast pace. So are there any questions? I don't know if there was anything left in the chat. But yeah, now it's time for questions. If you even want to come on off of mute and just ask, since we're a small group.
Carrie, this is Sarah.
Hi.
Hi, can I just tell people, this won't make you money, but I think one of the best things I have, can you understand what I'm saying? My whole face is still sound asleep.
We can,
Okay.
yeah, you're good.
Okay. One of the best things for me about doing my podcast, I have had the opportunity to meet the most wonderful people. And so there are women I interviewed that are fantastic, and I would never have met them if I didn't have the podcast. And just what you said, it's amazing when you ask people. I sometimes talk about my big deal women. And when I first started, I said to myself, I'm going to ask some big deal women. All they can say is no. And they didn't. They said yes. And so that won't always happen. But just, I've been doing it now like almost 60 times. And I've met the most wonderful women. So if nothing else, you meet fantastic people.
Yep, I agree.
Yeah, thanks, Sarah. Carrie, we had a couple of questions. I had one that I put in the chat. I said, what's the best way to pitch ourselves to be a guest to a podcast host?
Oh, I didn't. I think I forgot to put that in. So the best way is actually to connect with them is to go into, so if you're on Apple or Spotify, there should be a little link to the show notes. And what that does, it takes you to their player or their website where they're hosting the podcast. And that usually will give you all the information. I do have some templates that I could send you, Amy, that you could share with the group. And then tweak them for your own liking. But it's probably like anything. There's some, you'll have to apply to several before you get a yes. I know I have a friend that exclusively helps her clients pitch, and she said it's like for every 5 they get 1, which I think is still a pretty good ratio. And then just another little thing is some podcast hosts actually have like a form to fill out for guesting on their website. So I would just say don't give up. If you get like no crickets or you get no's, like don't give up. Just keep going.
Yeah, and it also may take a while for people to get back with you.
Yep, that too.
In my experience. So John, you had a question. Do you want to come on and just ask Carrie the question?
Sure. And thanks, Carrie. This was very informative. Lots of good information in here. In terms of doing your own podcast, do you produce it yourself? Do you hire someone to do it for you? If you do it on your own, what platforms are available and what would you suggest if you have any?
Yeah, so I haven't launched my own, and that, I mean, it's exclusively what I do is help people with their podcast. So you could do it on your own, as Amy was saying, she got burnt out and stopped. So there are ways to combat that, but if you have the budget, and I'm not just saying this because you could hire anybody to do it, I do think it's nice to have even just an editor to help edit the podcast. So it probably really, in that case, comes down more to a budget issue, because I would highly suggest, if it's not in your wheelhouse, to hire somebody at least to help with the editing, because that's just like Amy said, that's probably the biggest time suck out of the whole process.
Thank you.
Oh, and then you asked, where do you have them? So the two popular place to host your podcast is Captivate. I like Captivate, or Libsyn, which is like the original one, but they're kind of getting a little bit, they're not keeping up with the times as much, but they're still really good. If I had to pick one, I would say Captivate. It integrates really well with if you host your website on WordPress.
Thank you.
Sure.
Thanks, Carrie.
Yeah.
What about other questions?
I have a question with regard to timing of being a guest on podcasts with launching your book. Does anyone want to speak about that? Or Carrie, do you have any insight? Or
I
Amy,
mean,
you know?
I mean, in my mind, I think like either right before, like if you know you're gonna launch like that week before, or like, 'cause I feel like you don't want too much time where people are like waiting for it to come out. I don't know if Amy has thoughts on that. If I'm right or wrong on that, but that's my thought, is like either right before or right after you launch, because it's fresh and all of that.
Is that tricky to make happen with knowing that it's hard for people to get back to you, and you don't know
Yeah.
based on when they record you, they launch that program?
That's true, because you don't know. I know there's some people who have a very tight system with, you know, producing the show, and then there's some that it takes like 6 to 8 weeks to get it out. So yeah, that's a hard one. So I'd almost say, like, Amy, do you think you should wait for it? Like, what do people think? Just because I've never launched a book, I usually help people launch with like programs and stuff like that. Sarah,
Yeah.
you had
Yeah,
thoughts.
I
Go
just want to Sheila, just to give you an example. I contacted somebody because I wanted them to be on my podcast. And they said, I have a book coming out in 2 months. Could we schedule it then? And so we scheduled it 2 months in advance. And so it's coming up pretty soon. But I would go ahead and contact people and then say, I really would like to wait until X, because that's when my book's out, and that's when your audience will be most interested. So make it what's in it for them. And if they're doing it, they probably are booked out that far anyway. And so
Yeah.
it may just work out fine.
That's been my experience, Sarah, that not that I have a book or anything, but oftentimes it's a minimum of 1 to maybe 3 or 4 months from when you do the interview to when the episode drops. So it's really a coordination with them, and hopefully they could work with you on that. So you
Thank
can
you.
start early.
Yeah, thank you. That's what I'm
Yeah, I
hearing
would
from
echo
people.
that, Joyce. I think, you know, and Sheila, you and I talked a little bit, but, you know, I think even just getting the, you know, if you're on a lot of podcasts, I think, I love to always say that it's never too soon to start marketing your book and getting just the idea out there, getting on people's radar, you know, so then they may hear you on one podcast, they may, you know, see you on social media, they, you know, you coming at them from a lot of different directions. And I think that's good. The more they can see you, hear you, hear your book title and your topic, then that's great. It just kind of helps prime that pump for when the book does come out and is ready to go. So I would say, don't hold back. Go ahead and, you know, talk to people. And then, you know, you also, sometimes podcasters will have you on again later, you know, 6 months down the line or something, to just announce your book and talk about, you know, some other aspect than you talked about before. So, you know, could be, you could get more exposure than you even had originally planned on.
Oh, I do have, oh, go ahead, Sarah. Yeah.
No, go ahead, Joyce. I've talked a
Well,
lot.
one thing that's helped me doing podcasts is to keep really detailed records. So these folks will want you often to send a series of questions, so they're not interviewing you cold. And it varies, and that some will want detailed bios, longer bio, shorter bios, and I keep all those in a folder on my computer. So therefore, when I need information about myself, even for sometimes other purposes, it's been extremely helpful to be able to dip back into those files and see where there's a fit then, and there's redundancy, whatever, that it's helped me to save time. Definitely.
And I was going to say, to piggyback on what Joyce was saying, I found it because I've done quite a few podcasts as a guest, and not only that do they ask for those questions ahead of time, but I always have like a cheat sheet of those questions sitting beside me, because I've had a couple instances where the host was just getting started and they were very shy or very introverted, or I don't know what it was. And there was like crickets in the background and dead air space. And I had to then take responsibility and say, I've got an idea. How about if I share with the group something about whatever. And then I was able to take off and not just have it be dead air. So those were really helpful. The other thing was in connection with what Amy said about the connections. One of the best pieces of advice I had when I was getting ready to launch my book is somebody said, talk to anybody about your book, because you never know who they're connected to that may want it. And that truly came to fruition, because I was on a podcast that was related to travel, but not so much. And it wasn't that the group that I was talking with was interested, but one of the women had a husband who was in the travel industry, and she was like, oh, you better talk to this lady. So you never know who's listening. So
Yeah, good advice. Good advice, Jody. Thanks. Go ahead, Sarah.
Yeah, Carrie, I'm one of those people who, on all these podcasts I've hosted, I haven't sold a thing. And I'm absolutely determined I'm going to start doing that. If I as a host do that, when is it the best time to do it? In the middle, at the end?
I find at the end, because in the beginning, I feel like you haven't given them anything, even though they may have, listened to several of your other podcasts. I find like give them the episode and then kind of ask for something at the end, which is your offer.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
I do have one more. Maybe this is just me because I like to talk a lot, but I have to really work at stopping. Not exactly a soundbite, but give 2 or 3 thoughts and then stop, because they might have a follow-up question. You don't want to be too much you. It needs to be, I think, an interplay between the host and the guest. So that's what I've been worked on.
That's a great idea, because I do that too. You guys can tell I talk fast and I'm like excited about stuff. And yeah, so especially when it's more of a back and forth exchange, you want to give that pause to let them respond.
Yeah, and as a listener, I think it's more interesting to listen to, to have it really be a conversation. You feel like you're kind of, listening to, a real human conversation, real connection. So great advice. So we got some great questions and some great advice from you people who have been experienced podcast guests and hosts in Sarah's case. So Carrie, thank you so much. This has been tremendously helpful, especially I love that you're coming from a business standpoint, and how we can help our businesses as guests and as hosts. So if people want to contact you or get, just know more about what you do and how you do it and all that kind of stuff, what's the best way for people to get in touch with you, Carrie?
Yeah, so I'll put it in the chat, but it's just my name, carrielubing.com. I actually just went live with my website too. So
congratulations.
Perfect timing. And then I'll put my email if people just prefer to reach out like with a personal message. But yeah, I would love to hear. I'm open to anybody. If you just want to ask a question, like there's no pitching for me, like if we end up aligning to work together or something like that. But no, it's always just like ask questions, because I know it's a lot of work and it's a big commitment. So I always say, like, you don't want to go into it blind. So I'm here for questions.
Thank you so much. And Carrie is also a member of our Positively Powered Facebook group. So, we can interact there as well.
Oh yeah, I forgot about that. Yeah, reach out there as well if you have questions.
Yeah, yeah. And I'll post a follow-up and probably replay in the next couple days of this workshop, so that people who missed it can see it. And if you missed a sound bite that you want to go back to, you can replay it and listen to that. So
So
we've got
can I ask you a question though? I mean, is that just going to be posted in the Facebook group? So if we're not, is there a way to get the recording just separately? I mean, could you send it to those of us who attended, or how would that work?
Sure. Yeah. And you can always reach out to me, in an
Okay.
email, just ask
Okay.
for it. I'm happy
Sure,
to send
thank
you
you.
the link. Yeah,
Mhm.
because it'll actually be on your YouTube channel.
That's what I do with my meetup group. The
Yeah.
YouTube,
Yeah.
good idea.
Yeah. So I put it on YouTube and then I link it back to Facebook.
Cool.
So
Mhm.
yes,
Thank
easy
you.
to find, easy
Yeah.
to locate. So, all right. Well, thank you, everyone.
This
Did
is
you
great.
feel like you got some good value out of the information that we had
Fine.
today? So
Great.
yes,
Thank you.
thank you so
Thank you.
much, Carrie.
Wonderful session. Thanks.
For
Thank
your
you
help.
very much, Carrie.
Yeah,
Oh,
thanks
you're
everyone
welcome.
for
Thank you, Carrie.
Mhm.
Nice to
thanks
meet
for
you
taking
all.
time out of your day to be with us, and we'll see you soon.
Yeah, thanks guys. Bye.
Thanks,
Bye.
everyone.